Hello everyone, as always, I'm Vlad Sparastoria, I shoot and I know what shooting is. And this very interesting pistol is the Arsenal Strike 1. This is a weapon I've shot with many times in the past and that many of you have asked me to cover. But for one reason or another, I was never able to film it. Until today, clearly. So I can finally talk to you about this model, because it's actually quite an interesting weapon. How did it come about? Is the story a bit unclear? From this point of view, and also with how this story evolves to present a product that is actually extremely interesting, this is one of the most interesting weapons out there, and it's not particularly popular, by the way. One has to wonder why that is, and we'll ask ourselves during the live fire test how this weapon actually came to be. To understand this weapon, we need to introduce two people who are responsible for it, and whose names are on the patents. First of all, we have the Italian Nicola Bandini, a former journalist, inventor, and a rather prolific person in the field of weaponry. And for example, he had already founded, or rather co-founded, Caracal in 2004. Maybe you heard of this company based in the United Arab Emirates, which has produced a series of firearms and sold a number of firearm designs on the international market. Bandini also founded, again there in the United Arab Emirates, a company that produces ammunition. And at a certain point in the 2000s, he meets the second character in this story, Dmitry Straczynski, a Russian magnate, a wealthy Russian, an entrepreneur with a very particular passion. Yes, weapons, yes, collecting weapons, but miniature weapons. He has a company called Miniature Firearms, which makes miniature replicas, but replicas of the highest quality. We are talking about thousands of euros as the price of miniature versions of guns like the Mauser C96 at a 1:6 scale. It's a very particular branch of collecting, also because I, for example, personally, am not very passionate about these things, but there are people who have related collecting passions. Let's say weapons, but not strictly firearms. No, someone could collect I don't know, paintings of weapons or photos of weapons. Well, miniature weapons aren't really a theme that drives me crazy, not with excitement anyway. But I also recognize the fact that someone might like it or someone might think about it. I think that the average citizen, if they see us here, I mean me and you, viewers, talking about weapons as if they were collectibles, would judge us. So maybe it seems to me that these people making miniature guns are crazy, making miniature weapons. But if they're happy, who am I to judge, since I also have an obsessive passion like weapons? Anyway, getting back to us, the two of them actually team up because they have the idea of proposing a new pistol to the Russian military and police. Probably this is where Straczynski's political connections come into play. Also because you can't be rich in Russia without having political connections. Somehow, they actually go on to develop this design. Now, how much both of them actually contributed to the design of this weapon, I don't know. I haven't been able to determine that. I think Bandini had a huge hand in it, even though both names are on the patents. And I think this for the simple reason that after the Arsenal, we'll get to that in a moment, but it will change ownership. He himself founded a new company, which is Decima Divisione Ballistica, which actually goes back to this design. And it's not like you can easily pick up a design unless you knew it and built it yourself in the first place, especially not this one. If you understand me, it's difficult to copy from scratch and continue the development of a design like this. In this sense, then, my suspicion is that it might be interesting one day to meet Bandini, or maybe interview him, so Mr. Bandini, if you're watching me and want to chat. A little bit about your companies. I'd also appreciate info on the history of these weapons, since I believe firearms history is shaped by their inventors and manufacturers. Anyway, the weapon will not be adopted by the Russian military. Here too, one has to wonder why it had good results in the first tests. Probably political pressure. These promises of adoption probably didn't go anywhere. Russia continues to use its MP443 as its standard weapon. I've handled this weapon before, although I never filmed it for you. At that time there was no war in Ukraine, so it wasn't as interesting. Very simply put, to be completely honest. And the two move away from each other a little bit. And this design, which was supposed to be produced in Russia as well, actually gets moved to Italy, to Gardone Valtrompia. And it's produced there. It's made in Gardone. And it's actually redesigned, no longer offered as a weapon for carrying or self-defense, but as a sporting weapon. So the target market changes as well. The design is refined from this point of view, and it continues to work in this way. There's a bit of confusion about these weapons because actually there's an American equivalent of Arsenal firearms. Many companies set up factories and branches in America to actually get around some laws. But there they have some legal problems. As for the name Arsenal, they change it. So they are the Archon Strike B and Strike A for two different models, which are the same weapon produced by the American company, but technically and legally it's a different weapon. In short, it's a big mess, but we are always talking about the same design. In 2017, however, all of this whole story, was sold to a Czech entrepreneur, not blind, Czech, from the Czech Republic. Now, I haven't been able to determine who it is. I mean, this information that the company was sold is from 2022. When Il Fatto, forgive me for pronouncing this name, Il Fatto Quotidiano, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, talks about the Russians' shady dealings in the Italian arms industry and brings up Arsenal as an example. Arsenal responds through their lawyer saying, "Look, since 2017, we've been owned by a Czech entrepreneur. Everything is produced in Italy. The Russians have nothing to do with it at that stage, since the initial investment and design matter, but after that, they're not involved." Unfortunately, I wasn't able to determine who this investor is. It doesn't seem to be CZ, also because CZ would probably say so. They would say it quite openly. The fact is that this company changed hands. And Banini himself actually founded a new company, the already mentioned Decima Divisione Balistica, which is currently continuing to develop this idea. What is this idea? The key point of this weapon is a reworking of a very old locking system, which, I think, the last time I saw it in a pistol was in 1935 in Finland with the Lati. It's the so-called Bergman system. The Bergman system isn't very foreign if we think about the Beretta 90 series, except that the Beretta 90 series has evolved a lot over the years. We've seen in the past on the channel with various weapons how this design has evolved. But it all starts from the idea that having a short recoil weapon, so with the barrel moving together with the slide for a short distance before disengaging. A locking block was added to this system, which can usually move vertically. Think of the Beretta, which has a tilting one, where it still performs this vertical movement of locking and unlocking. Well, the Bergman system at its core is the same thing. Also because it has very slanted paths. I repeat, the Beretta comes from the idea. In the Arsenal, I have this locking system, except it's a small block that moves perfectly vertically. And actually it allows me to do something very interesting. When I go to shoot, I grip the firearm, the pistols. For construction reasons, they will almost all have it. Basically, the barrel is above the axis of my hand. Now, if I raise the barrel above the axis of my hand, when I go to shoot, so there's a force, a recoil. The more distance from the barrel to my hand, the more twist I have, the more leverage I have. So ideally, firearm designers want to keep the barrel as low as possible. Now, a low barrel isn't essential, but it helps. There are guns that are known for having a very high barrel, and yet they shoot just fine. They perform very well. The SIG 226 has a very high barrel, and yet you can't say it's a bad pistol. Absolutely not. But there can be an advantage, there can be a slight edge. Especially in a sports environment where hundredths of a second matter to win, and sometimes a hundredth of a second in recovery. In a string of fast shots, muzzle rise can be the difference between winning the match. That's why, maybe with the carry guns, we don't really care that much about the height of the barrel axis, even though obviously it can't be exaggerated. But with competition guns, we focus on this aspect a little more. And this system allows you to have the barrel very low because it's a very small component that really takes up very little space. And while on a part that swings, so it moves in this direction, I need to have space in the gun for all this movement. If I have a tilting barrel, like in Browning systems, I need to have space for this barrel to move all the way down and then all the way back up. I have some so-called dead space around the barrel. In this way, in theory, with this very small block that moves a very short distance, I can keep everything lower. Let's do something, because otherwise, if I explain it to you like this, you won't understand. Let's move the camera and take a closer look at what it's like, how it's made, and of course, we'll try it out. You forgive me, as always. Any noise from the fan, but it's 38 degrees inside the shooting range where we're filming. I'm a northerner, and I'm not exactly a fan of the heat. So let's take a closer look at the features of the weapon. First of all, as we know, it's made by Arsenal Firearms. We simply have Arsenal Firearms written here. I hope you can see it well. We also have it on the grip. The information that it was made in Italy in case there was any doubt. All these pistols are made in Italy. What is its model? Strike 1, as always, for export to America. There's the good old inscription that says, warning, fires without magazine. It doesn't have a magazine safety, so it will fire even if the magazine is not inserted. Another very important warning to avoid potential legal trouble is to read the manual. This is advice I always give to everyone, both in my videos and to those who come to visit me at Tirasferino di Legnano and ask me for advice on how to use their firearms better. I always strongly emphasize, read the manuals, because they often contain information about the use and maintenance of your firearm that you might not have. And they could actually be very, very important. Let's take a closer look at the mechanical features of the firearm and its controls. The controls are actually extremely simple. The firearm doesn't actually have manual safeties. We only have, clearly, a trigger. Surprise, surprise. If it's pulled, it will release the striker to fire. Then we have a button, for releasing the magazine. Here are the magazines, and the button can be switched to the other side for those who are left-handed. And then, on the left side of the weapon, we have a slide stop lever, which, as the name suggests, is used to lock the slide open. Whether it's when the rounds are finished and the magazine is empty, or manually to prepare the weapon for use, inspect it, fix some malfunctions, and so on. Then we have this pin that we will remove in a moment to disassemble the weapon and appreciate its operating mechanism. The sights are on these dovetails here, in this specific case. But these things, of course, can change a little bit. We have a fiber optic front sight and a rear sight, that I can describe as a truncated pyramid at the back, with two white dots that should help us a bit with aiming. One last control, or rather indicator, let's call it whatever we want, is the firing pin that sticks out from back here when the gun is cocked. In fact, if I pull the trigger, as you can see, it goes back in and lets me know that the firing system is not ready to use. So, how do we disassemble the gun? We need to push out this pin, which actually holds the locking block. From the outside, it looks a bit like the Browning system, but when we take it apart from the inside, we'll see that it's not. We can pull it out. And at this point, once it's pulled out, here it is, simply, the frame is separated from the barrel and the slide. Let's set the frame aside for a moment to continue disassembling. Here, with this system, we remove the recoil spring, which is a nice self-contained unit right here. And this way, we can remove the actual locking block, and then we can slide out the barrel of the weapon. How does this system work? You can see that the locking block has a diagonal cam that is crossed by this pin, which in the weapon is clearly fixed. So when the barrel and slide recoil together, this piece is forced to move up and down, moving vertically, rising and lowering. It can be inserted the other way around into this locking surface in the slide. You can see that, in fact, here in the slide of the weapon, I have two locking lugs, two surfaces where this block can engage. Just think of it. Exactly, but upside down, literally. The Beretta Series 90. The Beretta 90 series also has two notches on the sides of the slide. right where the locking block engages. Clearly the Beretta is assembled in a different way. And instead of moving vertically, okay, it mostly swings, so it moves in this direction rather than linearly. But the operation is absolutely the same. The barrel, when it's assembled, does exactly this job. So if I want the weapon to recoil, I need to have my locking block that unlocks everything. Everything is locked like this. But if I lift the block, as you can see, the slide can move. It reaches the end, the block lowers, and everything stays together. When the weapon fires and recoils against the pin that passes through here, the block moves and the whole cycle can take place. A very simple system in its operation, which I repeat is very loosely related. It's no coincidence that it reminds you of the Beretta 90 series, because the Beretta 90 series, through very indirect and convoluted ways, is actually derived from the same system. Bergman and Louis Schmeisser, who worked on these designs, actually ended up with the same thing. In the end, the C96, which is kind of the mother of all these systems, actually uses a system that is derived from the Bergman. I'll discuss it in more detail when I get a chance to film. A Qi, but they're all offspring, let's say, of these systems, all working the same way. So what's the advantage here? Did Arsenal do this too? Well, first point. In theory, the barrel here moves only on one axis, meaning the barrel only moves back and forth to recoil. It doesn't have, like the Browning systems, that movement on the vertical axis to unlock, which in theory could lead to greater mechanical accuracy. This could be considered an advantage of this system, and what makes it very clever is that it really takes up very little space. I mean, in other systems like the Browning or even Beretta itself, I need room for the locking block or the whole barrel to swing. But here, I actually only need space to move this small block. I save a lot of space and keep the bore axis extremely low. Compared to the weapon itself, this is the main and most obvious advantage of all when we analyze this system as we see it now. During the live fire test, when holding this weapon, the recoil is reduced because compared to my hand, the barrel is much lower, so the recoil force has less leverage. If I had a barrel, for example, much higher up, I would have a lot of leverage. Whereas having a barrel positioned lower and I decrease the leverage, I theoretically decrease the twist that causes the muzzle rise when I shoot. I really like that the weapon is very clean. This is something I really appreciate. It's very clean in its design. And look, by the way, these sliding surfaces of the slide, there is also a slight layer of oil. See how long they are, how the slide is supported throughout its entire, or at least most of its travel. By the way, I can easily see right now how it would be possible to maintain this length, let's say these parts of the frame, but shorten, for example, the front part to mount a shorter system. It's a system that can actually be quite easily adapted to a shorter barrel. It would be interesting to see a carry version. Let's do one thing, let's reassemble it. There's not much else to show you. If I would just put the recoil spring back in its place, it would be even better, because that way the gun would work. I put it in backwards. Let me see. I think I had put it in correctly. All right, sorry, here we are. Turns out I had put it in correctly. This way we can insert the weapon onto its rails and we can simply close it by pulling the slide and our block slightly back. Beautiful, let's go try it out. And here we are then, on the shooting range, finally testing our Arsenal Strike 1. As always, we insert the magazine, chamber the first round, let's see how it shoots. I'll tell you, I've waited a long time to do this review. Even though I was already familiar with these guns and I had really wanted to try them, for one reason or another, I always missed the chance to try them. These are weapons that I absolutely really like. The first thing I really love is the ergonomics. For some reason, this pistol fits my hand very well. Surprisingly slim. You see it from a distance, it doesn't look small, and it's not. But in your hand, it feels surprisingly slim. It has this relatively straight grip at the back, which I like, and this long beaver tail that actually allows you to place your hand very high. And you can feel this low bore axis. It doesn't work miracles, meaning that a low bore axis doesn't make you a good shooter. There are excellent pistols that have a very high bore axis. The SIG 226 is the first one that comes to mind, but it helps a little, If you grip it correctly, let me reload the magazine and fire a few more shots. It's a pistol with really well thought out ergonomics. It performs really well. I like, for example, the fact that it has a very squared off slide. Now, these are purely my personal preferences, but it's easy for me to grip and handle. One thing that I criticize about other systems, like Tanfoglio and CZ pistols, for example, is that it's a bit difficult to grip this slide. Whereas this one, in this case, is very easy, very nice. A small note, maybe what you'd call a downside, is that, oddly enough, this shape hides quite a lot from you of the target, meaning the iron sights clearly cover part of the target when you look at it, well, having these high angles, so to speak. I'll try to show you a picture or a video from behind the weapon to help you understand. They cover quite a lot of it. At least I have the impression, or at least the feeling, that it does this a bit more than other weapons, maybe those that are more streamlined on the upper part. But as far as handling goes, it really offers a solid and very intuitive grip, even with more modern techniques like the power stroke. Let's reload and try again. The trigger pull is short, very crisp, with a really symmetrical reset. You know what? At times, I find it hard to find any flaws with this weapon. And actually, at this point, I wonder why it isn't more successful. I mean, this is a design that has actually intrigued me for years, and those who remember my old live streams know that I often mentioned it as a very intriguing design. A very interesting pistol. One has to wonder why it hasn't been more successful. I don't mean that it's a failed weapon that nobody uses, but it's like finding a good product that not many people try to buy. It could also be a combination of factors, for example, stronger aftermarket support from other companies. Clearly, if you go to buy brands like Glock or CZ, you'll find many more holsters, accessories, spare parts. I don't know, it's a shame, maybe it's something else. Another thing that comes to mind is that it's probably purely a matter of marketing, in a sense. These weapons, which actually originate, as we've seen, from an idea of self-defense, are then sold as pistols, as sporting pistols. In my opinion, they struggle a bit to find their place from this point of view. Even Decima Divisione Ballistica, as we discussed, Evolution. Actually, with this design, they are also high-end sporting pistols. And in my opinion, it's a shame, because I would actually be very curious to see how the company would interpret this weapon as a carry gun. In the price range of 700 to 800 euros, in my opinion, it would have a lot of potential, because it was designed for exactly that. And you can kind of, so to speak, feel it. It's a pistol without too many frills attached, with relatively small levers, as combat weapons often are. It would be interesting. I would be very curious to see if, for example, a compact version could be made, something smaller in size, with a 15-round magazine with a shorter barrel to explore that form factor. or maybe I don't remember and it's already available, but I'd like to try it now because I think this pistol really deserves it. It performs well. It's not bad at all as a weapon. I'm quite enthusiastic, I'll tell you. I'm quite enthusiastic. Again, I'm a little surprised that it's not a bit more popular, but I definitely haven't found anyone yet who bought it and particularly complained about it. These are weapons that definitely work, and work well. At this point, let me know if you want me to explore further. Other models have made later versions with a heavier frame, not in polymer but in metal. Or even now, I'm very curious about the Rapax from 10ª Divisione Balistica, which is literally the evolution of this design. Let me know in the comments if you own these pistols and your thoughts on them. In the meantime, thank you all for watching this video. As always, remember that you are the ones who make these videos. You. Today, like the owner of this firearm who came here to the Lendiano shooting range to let me try it out, without the contribution of people who write to me and say, Vlad, do you want to try these firearms? My channel wouldn't be possible. So, if you have interesting pieces, write to me, let me know. Maybe we can organize something. If you want to contribute to the channel, also consider leaving a like, a comment, and if you haven't done it yet, subscribing. It's completely free. For me, as a content creator, it really helps a lot. That's all from me for today, and as always, I'll see you next time.